Now, Brian has raised two different issues, and I'm going to read them so I don't get them mistaken because each is separate, though they're connected as one idea. Science can't say whether God represents a loving, vengeful, or non-existent being. Right, pretty much. Science is really not in a very privileged position to tell us hardly anything about the supernatural world. Now, as I've argued in the past, you cannot disprove the existence of a supernatural being through science. It's not capable of doing that. However, scientific evidence, like the design features of the universe, may be used to infer the existence of an intelligent designer. So there's an interesting relationship there. Simply put, science can't say what God is like other than that the evidence might indicate that he's intelligent, he's personal. But you can't say whether he's loving or vengeful, etc. I think it can say whether he exists or not in the sense that we're inferring facts, causes that are adequate to effects that we see that science is able to measure. Okay. Second, he says, but researchers have revealed for the first time how such religious belief triggers different parts of the brain. Now, if I take him, Brian, directly at his words, I don't know why this should create any concern for us at all. If he's saying that researchers have found out how our beliefs in our mind influence our brain states, well, that's non-controversial. All kinds of thoughts that we have influence our physical body. Okay, I think what he meant to say is the more controversial thing, that our brain states are the things that influence our religious views. And of course, it is a two-way street to some degree. That it could be the case that our physical condition could have an influence on our religious outlook. What most people try to do with this information is they try to dismiss religious claims by saying, well, there's no God. What God is something your brain creates, and I know where it creates that, right there in this area of your brain. Now, at first blush, this sounds compelling to people, but I want to point out that this is an example of genetic fallacy. That is, trying to disprove a point by looking at the origin of the point of view. I mean, for the sake of discussion, it might be that chemical processes in my brain cause me to believe in God. But of course, that doesn't tell you anything about whether God exists or not. Whether or not he exists depends on external evidence. You can't simply explain away God's existence because you think that I have a chemical reasons for believing in God, or chemical causation, or even emotional things. Oh, you believe in God because you need a father figure or something like that. You need a crutch. Well, I might need a father figure. I might need a crutch, and it may be, for the sake of discussion, that my beliefs are caused by chemistry in the brain. But none of those things address the question of whether God exists. They just tell you about Greg Koukl's brain or Greg Koukl's emotions or psychological state. So it is a fallacious way to argue there. Instead, one has to first look at the evidence for God. And if God does not exist, and there's no good evidence for God, then it might be meaningful to ask, gee, why would somebody believe something that there's no good evidence to believe? Oh, I know, he's got this brain activity that causes him to do that. Oh, that now it makes sense. Well, that's getting the right order. If you first try to dismiss a view for some brain causation explanation without showing that the view itself is false, you've got the tail wagging the dog. One last thing, though, is that there are always relationships between the mind activity and the body activity, or mind states and brain states, soul states and brain states. Just because there are correlations, that is, when you're thinking about God, some part of your brain lights up. When you're doing a moral action, some other part of your brain lights up. Because there's a correlation between those two does not mean that one is causing the other. This is a mistake that's made all the time in neurology, neuroscience, and even in philosophy and the science of mind, which is the philosophical area that's related to this question. Just because there is constant correlation doesn't mean there's causation. That's a different question entirely. And what they have to show is not just that the brain is active during this time, but that the brain, in every single case, causes the belief in God. And by the way, even if it does, It doesn't tell you anything about whether or not God exists. It's another issue.